Rain hammered against the dirty window of Bill Cross's tiny apartment, each drop like a small fist demanding attention he refused to give. He sat in his worn chair staring at the gray walls that had become his entire world. 23 years ago, those same walls had been covered with medals, awards, and photos of his crew. Now they were empty except for water stains and peeling paint. The communication device on his table beeped with another overdue payment notice. Bill ignored it, just like he ignored everything else these days. His fingers traced the rim of his glass, filled with the cheapest synthetic alcohol Station Echo 7 had to offer. It tasted terrible, but it did the job of keeping the memories quiet. Outside his window, the mining station continued its endless work. Massive drilling arms moved up and down, pulling precious metals from the asteroid they called home. Workers in environmental suits floated between the machinery like tiny insects. Bill watched them sometimes, remembering when he used to command thousands of people with the same purpose and precision. But that was before the war ended, before the peace treaties were signed, before humanity decided it no longer needed old soldiers like William Cross. His stomach growled, reminding him that he had not eaten anything real in 3 days. The food dispensers in his wall could create basic nutrition blocks, but they required credits he did not have. The mining company that owned Station Echo 7 was generous enough to let veterans live here cheaply, but cheap was still more than his military pension could handle comfortably. A loud crash echoed from the hallway outside his door. Bill heard voices arguing in different languages. The station housed workers from dozens of human colonies, and they did not always get along well. Fighting was common, especially when people were tired, underpaid, and far from home. Someone should do something about that, Bill muttered to himself, then took another drink. Someone else's problem now. The arguing grew louder, and Bill heard what sounded like furniture being thrown around. A woman's voice cried out in fear. Bill's hand tightened on his glass, and for just a moment, something stirred in his chest, the same feeling that used to make him charge into danger to protect his crew. But that feeling died as quickly as it came. Bill forced himself to stay in his chair. He was not a hero anymore. Heroes had duties, responsibilities, people who counted on them. Bill had none of those things. He was just a forgotten old man drinking alone in a room that smelled like failure. The fighting outside eventually stopped. The woman's voice went quiet. Bill told himself she was probably fine. That station security had handled it, that it was not his business anyway. His communication device beeped again. This time it was not a Bill. The message was from his old friend Robert, who had served with him during the war. Robert lived on a beautiful colony world now, with a big house and a family. He sent messages every few months trying to stay in touch. Bill, hope you are doing well out there. My daughter just graduated from the academy. She wants to join the space fleet. I told her about you, about how you saved my life at the Battle of Three Suns. She would love to meet you someday. Take care of yourself, old friend. Bill deleted the message without reading it completely. He did not want to think about bright young people joining the fleet. He did not want to remember saving anyone's life because it reminded him of all the lives he had failed to save. The rain against his window got heavier, matching the storm in his mind. Sleep would come eventually, and with it, the dreams. Always the same dreams. His ship burning. His crew screaming. The enemy weapons tearing through their hull like paper. And him, standing on the bridge watching good people die because his orders were not fast enough or smart enough or brave enough. They called him the Dragon back then. Said he breathed fire on his enemies and protected humanity with claws and teeth. The newspapers loved that name. They wrote stories about his victories, his brilliant tactics, his fearless leadership. What they did not write about was the weight that came with every decision, the faces of the dead that visited him in his sleep, the way victory always tasted like ash in his mouth. Bill finished his drink and considered getting another, but his credits were running too low. Soon he would have to make choices between alcohol and food, between staying numb and staying alive. The smart choice was obvious, but Bill was not feeling very smart these days. A small sound came from the wall behind him, scratching like tiny claws on metal. Probably rats. The station had plenty of them, living in the spaces between the walls, eating whatever scraps they could find. Bill envied them sometimes. Rats did not have to think about their past mistakes or worry about their uncertain future. They just survived day by day without expecting anything more. His door chimed, indicating someone wanted to enter. Bill ignored it. People rarely visited him, and when they did, It was usually to collect money he did not have or deliver bad news he did not want to hear. The chiming stopped after a while, and Bill heard footsteps moving away down the corridor. Night was falling on the station, which meant the shifts were changing. The day workers would go to their homes and families, while the night workers prepared for another long shift in the dark between the stars. Bill used to love the rhythm of space stations, the way they hummed with constant activity and purpose. Now it just reminded him that life was continuing without him. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. Gray hair, gray skin, gray eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. He was only 54 years old, but he felt ancient. The war had aged him in ways that time could not heal. Tomorrow he would have to venture out of his apartment. His credit account was nearly empty, and the landlord had already sent 2 warnings about late rent. He would need to find work, probably in the mines or the maintenance tunnels, hard, dirty work that paid barely enough to survive. It was not much of a life, but it was the only life left for an old soldier who had outlived his usefulness. Bill closed his eyes and tried to imagine a different future, but his imagination had grown as gray and tired as everything else about him. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw only more of the same. More empty days, more sleepless nights, more slow decay until even the memories stopped hurting, because there would be nothing left of him to feel the pain. The rain continued to fall, and Bill continued to sit in his chair, waiting for nothing in particular and expecting even less. Hunger finally drove Bill Cross from his apartment 3 days later. His food dispenser had stopped working entirely, flashing red warnings about insufficient credit balance. The synthetic alcohol had run out too, leaving him with nothing but tap water and growing desperation. Station Echo 7's main corridor buzzed with activity as Bill walked through it for the first time in weeks. Workers hurried past him carrying tools and equipment, their conversations creating a constant background noise in dozens of languages. The air smelled like metal polish, recycled atmosphere, and the sweat of people who worked hard for little pay. Bill kept his head down as he walked, hoping nobody would recognize him. Most of the current residents were too young to remember the war, but sometimes older workers would stare at him with expressions he could not read. Some looked angry, as if his presence reminded them of friends they had lost. Others looked sad, like they were seeing a broken piece of history that should have been honored instead of forgotten. His first stop was the employment office, a small room with flickering lights and furniture that had seen better decades. The clerk behind the desk was a tired-looking woman with grease under her fingernails and patience worn thin by dealing with desperate people all day. Cross. William, she said, reading his information from a screen. Age 54, military background, no civilian work experience. She looked up at him with the expression of someone about to deliver bad news. Mining crews won't take anyone over 45. Too much risk of injury and the insurance costs are terrible. Maintenance work might be possible, but it only pays 8 credits per day and there's a waiting list. 8 credits per day would barely cover food, never mind rent or anything else he needed to survive. Bill felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized how few options he actually had. Is there anything else? He asked. The clerk shrugged. Plasma cleaning in the waste processing center pays 12 credits per day, but most people only last a few weeks before the radiation exposure gets too bad. No insurance coverage for long-term health effects. Bill nodded and left the office without signing up for anything. Slowly poisoning himself for 12 credits per day seemed like a poor way to spend whatever time he had left. His next stop was supposed to be the pawn shop, where he planned to sell his few remaining possessions. But as he walked through the station's commercial district, something caught his attention. A crowd had gathered around a small shop he had never noticed before, with people talking excitedly in hushed voices. Curiosity was a feeling Bill had not experienced in years, but it pulled him toward the crowd despite his better judgment. He pushed through the group of onlookers until he could see what everyone was looking at. The shop belonged to Leo Martinez, a junk dealer who usually sold broken electronics and spare parts to miners who could not afford new equipment. But today his stall was different. Strange objects filled his display cases, things that looked old and valuable and completely out of place on a mining station. Got them from a salvage crew that found an old transport ship drifting near the outer ring. Leo was telling anyone who would listen. Ship had been floating dead for maybe 30 years. Crew was long gone, but the cargo hold was full of stuff like this. Bill studied the objects more carefully. Most of them looked like expensive antiques or art pieces from the old Earth colonies, the kind of things wealthy families would have owned before the war changed everything. There were carved statues, jewelry made from rare metals, books bound in real leather, and devices whose purposes were not immediately clear. But one item made Bill's heart skip a beat. Sitting in a corner of the display case, almost hidden behind larger objects, was something that looked like an egg. It was about the size of both his fists put together, with a smooth surface that seemed to shift between different colors depending on how the light hit it. Tiny patterns covered its surface, so detailed they looked almost like scales. Bill had seen something similar once before during his military service. The Earth Defense Corps had experimented with biomechanical companions, creatures that were part living tissue and part advanced technology. The project had been abandoned when the war started, and all existing specimens were supposedly destroyed. But this looked exactly like the companion pods he had seen in classified military files. If it was real, it was worth more than everything else in Leo's shop combined. If it was just a clever fake, it was still beautifully made. "How much for that egg?" Bill asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Leo followed his gaze and shrugged. "That old thing? Probably just a decoration from someone's kitchen. 2 credits if you want it, 2 credits." Bill almost laughed. If this was really what he thought it was, Leo was asking for less than the price of a meal. But Bill only had 5 credits left to his name, and spending nearly half of his remaining money on what was probably just a pretty ornament seemed foolish. On the other hand, something about the egg called to him. Its surface seemed to pulse gently, as if there was light moving beneath its shell. When Bill looked at it directly, he felt a warmth in his chest that he had not experienced in years. "I'll take it," he said. Before he could change his mind, Leo wrapped the egg in soft cloth and handed it to Bill along with a small card. "Instructions were with it," he said, "though I have no idea what it's supposed to do." Bill read the card as he walked back to his apartment. The writing was in Old Earth standard, the kind of formal language used in military documents from before the war. Biomechanical Companion Series 7. Activation requires sustained contact with compatible life signs. Bonding process may take 24 to 72 hours. Companion will adapt to user's emotional and physical needs. Warning: do not attempt activation unless prepared for long-term commitment. Back in his apartment, Bill unwrapped the egg and set it on his small table. Under the harsh lights of his room, it looked different than it had in Leo's shop. The colors were deeper, more complex, and the patterns on its surface seemed to move when he was not looking directly at them. He reached out to touch it, then pulled his hand back. If this was really a companion pod, activating it would mean taking responsibility for another living being. Bill was not sure he was capable of that anymore. He could barely take care of himself. But as night fell and the egg continued to pulse with gentle light, Bill found himself drawn to it. He had spent so many years alone, surrounded by silence and emptiness. The idea of having something alive in his apartment, even something artificial, was both terrifying and appealing. Finally, curiosity won over caution. Bill placed his hand on the egg's surface and was surprised by how warm it felt. The pulsing light grew brighter under his touch, and he could swear he felt something moving inside. Nothing dramatic happened immediately. The egg just sat there warm and glowing while Bill's hand rested on its surface. But for the first time in months, Bill felt like he was not completely alone. Something was responding to his presence, recognizing him as important enough to react to. He left his hand on the egg until exhaustion finally forced him to sleep. His dreams that night were different than usual. Instead of burning ships and dying friends, he dreamed of small, bright creatures flying through star-filled skies, calling to him in voices like music. When he woke the next morning, the egg had changed. Thin cracks had appeared across its surface, and the light pulsing from within was stronger and more regular, like a heartbeat. Bill realized with a mixture of excitement and terror that whatever was inside was getting ready to be born. He had no idea what he was about to become responsible for, but for the first time in years he was looking forward to finding out. Bill woke to the sound of gentle tapping, like rain on metal but softer and more rhythmic. His apartment was still dark, the artificial dawn cycle not due to begin for another 2 hours. The sound was coming from his table, where the egg sat glowing brighter than he had ever seen it. The cracks in its surface had spread during the night, creating intricate patterns that reminded Bill of circuit boards or the veins in a leaf. Light leaked through each crack, pulsing in time with what could only be described as breathing. Whatever was inside was definitely alive, and it was ready to come out. Bill sat up in his chair where he had fallen asleep watching over the egg. His back ached from the awkward position, but he ignored the discomfort as he leaned closer to observe what was happening. The tapping sound grew more insistent, and he could see the egg trembling slightly with each impact from within. A small piece of shell fell away, revealing something that made Bill's breath catch in his throat. Through the opening, he could see what looked like a tiny claw made of metal and living tissue combined, pushing against the remaining shell. The claw was followed by a small head covered in scales that shifted between silver and blue as they caught the light. "Easy there," Bill whispered, surprising himself by speaking out loud. "Take your time." The creature seemed to hear him because the tapping slowed to a steadier rhythm, less frantic and more purposeful. More pieces of shell fell away, and Bill watched in amazement as a small dragon-like being pulled itself free from its prison. It was beautiful in a way that made Bill's chest tight with emotions he had forgotten how to feel. No bigger than his hand, the creature had 4 legs ending in delicate claws, wings that looked like they were made from starlight, and a long tail that curved gracefully behind it. Its scales were not just one color but seemed to contain entire galaxies, shifting and swirling as the creature moved. Most striking were its eyes. Large and bright, they held an intelligence that was unmistakably real. When the creature looked at Bill, he felt like it was seeing everything about him, understanding him in a way that no one had in years. The tiny dragon took a shaky step forward, then stumbled as its legs betrayed it. Bill instinctively reached out to catch it, and the creature crawled onto his palm without hesitation. It was warm, warmer than anything had a right to be, and Bill could feel a faint vibration through its body like a cat purring, but much more subtle. "Hello there," Bill said softly. "I guess you're mine now." The creature tilted its head, studying his face with those remarkable eyes. Then it made a sound, a soft chirping noise that somehow conveyed contentment and curiosity at the same time. Bill found himself smiling, the first genuine smile he had managed in months. The instruction card had mentioned that the companion would adapt to his needs, but Bill had not expected the changes to be so immediate or so profound. Just holding the small creature made him feel more alert and focused than he had been in years. The constant ache in his chest, the weight of loneliness and regret that he carried everywhere, seemed lighter somehow. "You're going to need a name," Bill told the dragon. "Can't just keep calling you creature or little one." The dragon chirped again and crawled up his arm to perch on his shoulder. From there, it had a better view of the apartment, and Bill could see it taking in every detail with obvious intelligence. Its gaze lingered on the empty bottle that had held his synthetic alcohol, the unpaid bills scattered across his table, and the water stains on his walls. "Not much to look at, I know," Bill said with embarrassment. "I haven't been taking very good care of myself lately." The dragon turned to look at him directly, and Bill had the strangest feeling that it understood not just his words, but the pain behind them. It pressed its tiny head against his cheek, and the warmth seemed to spread through his entire body, easing tensions he had not even realized he was carrying. "Spark," Bill said suddenly. "That's what I'll call you. Spark." The dragon, Spark, chirped in what sounded like approval and settled more comfortably on his shoulder. Bill could feel its claws gripping his shirt gently, careful not to hurt him but firm enough to maintain its balance. For the first time in months, Bill felt hungry for actual food instead of just alcohol. His stomach rumbled loudly, and Spark's head snapped toward the sound with obvious concern. The dragon chirped questioningly, and Bill found himself explaining his situation out loud. "I don't have much money left," he admitted. "Been living on nutrition blocks when I can afford them, nothing else when I can't. Not exactly a balanced diet, but it keeps me alive." Spark chirped again, this time with what sounded like disapproval. It flew from his shoulder to the food dispenser on his wall and perched on top of it, looking back at Bill expectantly. "I told you, I don't have enough credits for anything good." But when Bill checked his account balance, he was surprised to find it had changed. Instead of the 2 credits he should have had left, the display showed 17 credits. Somehow, 15 more credits had appeared overnight. Bill checked the transaction history and found a single entry logged just an hour ago. "Salvage recovery bonus, 15 credits, station maintenance fund." "That's impossible," Bill muttered. "I haven't done any salvage work." But the credits were real, and Spark was still perched on the food dispenser, chirping hopefully. Bill shrugged and ordered a real meal, the first he had eaten in weeks. Protein, vegetables, even some fruit that had probably been grown in the station's hydroponic gardens. As he ate, Spark explored the apartment with obvious curiosity. The tiny dragon could fly, but it seemed to prefer walking and climbing, using its claws to navigate the furniture and walls with ease. It investigated everything, from the dusty corners to the flickering lights, always returning to check on Bill as if making sure he was still there. When Bill finished eating, he felt more energetic than he had in months. His mind was clearer, his body felt stronger, and the constant fog of depression that usually clouded his thoughts had lifted enough for him to think about practical matters. His apartment was a mess. He had let cleaning slide for so long that he had stopped noticing the dirt and clutter, but with Spark watching him with those intelligent eyes, Bill suddenly felt ashamed of his living conditions. "You deserve better than this," he told the dragon. "We both do." Bill spent the rest of the day cleaning. He threw away empty bottles and expired food packages, scrubbed the walls and floor, and organized the few possessions he still owned. Spark helped in its own way, perching on his shoulder and occasionally flying to point out areas he had missed. As evening approached, Bill realized he felt better than he had in years. His body was tired from the physical work, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from accomplishment rather than despair. His apartment actually looked like a place where people could live with dignity. Spark curled up on Bill's chest as he settled into his chair for the night. The dragon's warmth spread through him like a gentle fire, easing the aches in his muscles and the deeper pains in his heart. For the first time in months, Bill fell asleep without needing alcohol to quiet his mind. His dreams were peaceful, filled with images of flying through starfields with a companion who understood him completely. When he woke the next morning, Spark was still there, real and warm and alive. Bill realized that something fundamental had changed in his life, something that went far beyond having a pet or companion. He had something to care for again, something that depended on him and trusted him completely. The feeling was both terrifying and wonderful, like finding a light in darkness he had forgotten was not permanent. Outside his window, Station Echo 7 continued its endless work. But Bill was no longer just watching from the sidelines. He had become part of something again, even if it was just a tiny dragon that had chosen him as its person. For the first time in years, Bill Cross felt like he might have a future worth living. Spark had been with Bill for exactly 12 days when the attack began. Bill was teaching the small dragon to play simple games with spare parts from his repair kit when the station's emergency alarm started blaring. The sound was different from the usual work shift alerts or equipment warnings. This was the deep pulsing tone that meant serious danger. Bill froze, memories flooding back from his military days. He knew that sound too well. It meant incoming hostiles, unknown ships approaching the station with unclear intentions. Spark sensed his tension immediately, the tiny dragon scales shifting to darker colors as it perched alertly on his shoulder. "Attention all residents," came the voice over the station's communication system. "Unknown vessels have entered our system and are not responding to standard identification requests. This is not a drill. All civilians should report to designated safe areas immediately." Through his small window, Bill could see the distant flicker of ship lights against the starfield. Too many lights moving in formations that spoke of military precision. His trained eye counted at least 20 vessels, far more than any legitimate business would require in this remote system. The corridor outside his apartment erupted in chaos as people rushed past his door. Bill heard children crying, adults shouting in panic, and the heavy footsteps of station security trying to maintain order. Part of him wanted to stay in his room, to pull the covers over his head and pretend the danger would pass without touching him. But Spark chirped urgently and flew to the door, looking back at him with those intelligent eyes. The dragon seemed to be saying what Bill's own conscience was whispering. People needed help, and he had the skills to provide it. "I'm not that person anymore," Bill told Spark, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm just a broken old man who drinks too much and can't even pay his rent on time." Spark flew back to him and pressed its tiny head against his cheek. The warmth that spread from the contact was different this time, stronger and more focused. It felt like courage, like the spark of heroism that had once made him famous across human space. The station shuddered as something impacted its outer hull. Emergency lights began flashing, and the artificial gravity fluctuated briefly before stabilizing. Whatever was out there had stopped talking and started shooting. Bill's military training kicked in automatically. He moved to a small communication device and tuned it to the emergency frequencies, listening to the chatter between station security and the approaching ships. What he heard made his blood run cold. "This is Commander Voss of the Hegemony Assault Fleet," came a harsh voice over the radio. "Station Echo 7 is now under our control. Surrender immediately and prepare for boarding. Any resistance will be met with complete destruction. The Hegemony." Bill knew that name from intelligence reports he had read during the war. They were not pirates or common raiders. They were an organized military force that had been building power in the outer systems, conquering isolated settlements and enslaving their populations. They had advanced ships, disciplined troops, and a reputation for showing no mercy to those who opposed them. Station Echo 7's security chief came on the radio next, his voice shaking with barely controlled fear. "Unknown vessels, this is a civilian mining operation. We have no military value and pose no threat to anyone. Please state your intentions." "Our intentions are conquest," Voss replied coldly. "You have 1 hour to prepare for complete surrender. Any ships attempting to leave the system will be destroyed. Any weapons detected will result in immediate retaliation against civilian areas." Bill listened to the panicked radio chatter that followed. Station Echo 7 had minimal defenses, just a few security officers with basic weapons and some automated systems designed to ward off small-time pirates. Against a Hegemony assault fleet, they might as well have been throwing rocks at a battleship. But Bill knew something about battleships. He had faced worse odds during the war, and found ways to win through superior tactics and creative thinking. The question was whether he still had those skills buried somewhere beneath years of alcohol and self-pity. Spark seemed to read his thoughts. The dragon flew to his old uniform, which hung forgotten in the back of his closet, and perched on the sleeve. The message was clear. It was time for Bill Cross to remember who he used to be. "I don't know if I can do this," Bill admitted to his tiny companion. "It's been so long since I commanded anything. What if I've forgotten how? What if I make things worse?" Spark chirped softly and flew back to land on his hand. The dragon's scales shifted to bright gold, the color of hope and determination. In those intelligent eyes, Bill saw something he had not seen in years. He saw faith. Spark believed in him completely, even when he could not believe in himself. Another impact shook the station, this one strong enough to knock items off Bill's table. The lights flickered and he could hear the sound of metal groaning under stress. The Hegemony ships were not waiting for their deadline. They were already beginning their assault. Bill made his decision. He pulled his old uniform from the closet, surprised to find it still fit reasonably well despite his years of poor eating and lack of exercise. The fabric was faded and the rank insignia tarnished, but it was still the uniform of a decorated military officer. Spark perched proudly on his shoulder as Bill checked his appearance in the mirror. The man looking back at him was older and more weathered than the hero from the history books, but there was something familiar in his eyes. The spark of command was still there, buried but not dead. He gathered his few remaining military manuals and headed for the door. The corridors were chaos, with people running in all directions and security officers trying unsuccessfully to maintain order. Bill pushed through the crowd toward the station's command center, his military bearing causing people to step aside automatically. The command center was in complete disarray when Bill arrived. Security Chief Martinez was shouting orders that nobody seemed to understand, while technicians stared helplessly at displays showing the approaching enemy fleet. Everyone was talking at once and nothing useful was getting done. "Chief Martinez," Bill called out in his old command voice. The authority in his tone cut through the chaos like a blade, causing everyone in the room to turn and look at him. Martinez recognized him immediately. "Cross, what are you doing here?" "This is a restricted area during emergencies." "I'm here to help," Bill replied simply. "You're facing a Hegemony assault fleet with minimal defenses and no coherent strategy. You need someone who knows how to fight these kinds of battles." "You're a washed-up drunk," Martinez snapped, his fear making him cruel. "Nobody cares about your war stories anymore." Bill felt the familiar sting of rejection, but Spark chirped encouragingly on his shoulder. The dragon's presence reminded him that some things were more important than personal pride. People were going to die if he walked away, and he was the only person on the station with the knowledge to prevent it. "Look at your screens," Bill said calmly, pointing to the tactical displays. 20 ships in a classic envelope formation, closing at standard assault speed. They're planning to dock at airlock 7, 12, and 19 while their heavy ships bombard the mining equipment to prevent you from using it as cover. This isn't random piracy. This is a textbook planetary assault. And you're about to lose everyone on this station unless you start thinking like soldiers instead of miners. Martinez looked at the displays, then back at Bill. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a desperate hope. What do you suggest? Bill studied the tactical situation, his mind automatically calculating angles, timing, and resources. It felt good to use his brain for something other than finding new ways to hate himself. Spark's presence on his shoulder was warm and encouraging, like having a piece of his own courage made manifest. First, we're going to make them think we're more dangerous than we actually are, Bill said, moving to the command console. Then we're going to use the station's structure against them in ways they won't expect. And finally, we're going to prove that humans don't surrender easily, even when the odds are impossible. For the first time in years, Commander Bill Cross was back in his element. The dragon on his shoulder pulsed with golden light, and the broken old man began to remember what it felt like to be a hero. Bill's fingers moved across the command console with the smooth confidence of someone born to lead. 20 years of retirement fell away as his military instincts took control, analyzing the tactical situation with the cold precision that had once made him legendary. "Shut down all external lights," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority that made people obey without question. "Make it look like we're powering down for surrender. Martinez, I need you to send a message to the hegemony fleet. Tell them we're preparing to comply with their demands but need 2 hours to safely evacuate our mining equipment." 2 hours? Martinez looked confused. "That's longer than they gave us." "They'll give us the time because they want the mining equipment intact," Bill explained while studying the sensor readings. "Industrial machinery is valuable and destroying it costs them money. Greed will buy us the time we need." Spark had been unusually quiet during the planning, but now the small dragon suddenly became agitated. Its scales shifted to bright red, and it chirped urgently while staring at a particular console. Bill followed its gaze and saw something that made his tactical assessment much more complex. "Those aren't just assault ships," he muttered, studying the detailed sensor data that Spark seemed to have directed him toward. 3 of them are troop transports, but the others are equipped for salvage operations. They're not here to destroy the station. They want to capture it intact and enslave the population. This changed everything. A simple smash-and-grab raid was one thing, but a full occupation meant the hegemony planned to use Station Echo 7 as a permanent base. They would be more careful, more methodical, and much harder to drive off, but it also gave Bill opportunities he would not have had against raiders who just wanted to cause destruction. "New plan," Bill announced to the room. "We're going to make them think they've won, then turn their own strategy against them. Martinez, send that surrender message. Make it sound defeated and hopeless. I want them to think we're broken and ready to give up." While Martinez composed the message, Bill turned to the other technicians in the room. Most of them were young, probably fresh out of training programs and completely unprepared for military action. But they were listening to him with the kind of attention usually reserved for emergency broadcasts. "I need volunteers," Bill said simply. "What we're about to do is dangerous and I won't order anyone to risk their life. But if we do nothing, the hegemony will enslave or kill everyone on this station. That includes your families, your friends, and yourselves." Every hand in the room went up without hesitation. Bill felt something warm and proud swell in his chest, an emotion he had not experienced since his active duty days. These people were afraid, but they were choosing to be brave anyway. It was the most human thing he had seen in years. Spark chirped approvingly and flew to the main display screen, perching on the frame. The dragon's scales had shifted to a brilliant silver that seemed to reflect the light in impossible ways. When Bill looked at his tiny companion, he felt his own confidence grow stronger. "Harris, I need you to access the mining control systems," Bill directed one of the technicians. "Program the excavation arms to respond to manual override, but keep it hidden from the main computer. Thompson, you're going to modify our communication array to send a very specific signal on a frequency the hegemony won't be monitoring." As his improvised team worked, Bill explained his strategy. The plan was complex, requiring precise timing and more than a little luck, but it used the station's unique advantages against the enemy's expectations. "The hegemony thinks they're attacking a helpless mining station," Bill told them. They're expecting minimal resistance and easy occupation. We're going to give them something completely different. An hour later, the first hegemony ship docked at Airlock 7, exactly as Bill had predicted. Through the security cameras, he watched armed soldiers in combat armor march through the corridors, expecting to find cowering civilians. Instead, they found empty passages and sealed doors. Phase 1, Bill announced calmly. Spark chirped once, a sound that somehow conveyed both approval and anticipation. The modified mining arms, controlled now by Harris from the command center, swung around to target the docked ships. The massive industrial equipment had never been designed as weapons, but they were powerful enough to crush metal and dig through solid rock. Against the hulls of even military vessels, they were devastatingly effective. The first hegemony ship was torn open like a can, its atmosphere venting into space along with several very surprised soldiers. The second ship tried to undock quickly, but was caught by a mining arm that wrapped around its engine section and held it in place for the other arms to methodically dismantle. "Impossible," came Commander Voss's voice over the radio. "This is a civilian station. Where did you get military-grade weapons?" Bill keyed the communication system personally, his voice carrying the cold authority of a career military officer. "This is Commander William Cross of the Terran Defense Force. You are attacking a human settlement under my protection. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." There was a long pause before Voss responded, and when he did, his voice carried a new note of uncertainty. "Cross the Dragon? You're supposed to be dead." "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Bill replied with grim satisfaction. "You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal, or I'll show you why they used to call me the terror of the outer systems." It was a bluff, of course. Station Echo 7 had no real military capabilities beyond the mining equipment he had just used, but Bill was gambling that his reputation was still scary enough to make the hegemony commander think twice. Unfortunately, Voss was either braver or stupider than Bill had hoped. "Destroy the mining equipment," Voss ordered his remaining ships. "All weapons, full bombardment. I want that station reduced to scrap metal." This was the moment Bill had been preparing for. "Phase 2, he announced, and Spark's scales brightened to an almost blinding gold. Thompson activated the modified communication array, sending a signal that Bill had programmed, based on his knowledge of hegemony military protocols. It was a standard fleet coordination frequency, the kind used by their ships to stay in formation during complex maneuvers. But instead of coordination data, Bill's signal contained carefully crafted interference designed to confuse their targeting systems and disrupt their communications. 20 years of studying enemy tactics during the war had taught him exactly how to turn their own technology against them. The results were immediate and spectacular. The hegemony ships trying to target the station's mining equipment instead began firing on each other as their computers received conflicting location data. Explosions bloomed in the space around Station Echo 7 as military-grade weapons found unintended targets. "What's happening?" Martinez asked in amazement as they watched the enemy fleet tear itself apart. "They're learning that humans are more dangerous than they look," Bill replied. Spark chirped in what sounded remarkably like laughter, but Bill knew the confusion would not last long. Hegemony commanders were well trained, and they would figure out what was happening soon enough. He needed to end this quickly while he still had the advantage. "Phase 3, he announced. "Harris, target the command ship. All mining arms. Maximum power." The massive excavation equipment turned toward Voss's flagship like the fingers of an enormous metal hand. The ship was larger and better armored than the others, but it was designed for space combat, not for resisting the kind of crushing force used to break apart asteroids. "This is impossible." Voss's voice crackled over the radio as his ship was grabbed by multiple mining arms. "A mining station cannot defeat a hegemony assault fleet." "You're right," Bill replied calmly. "A mining station couldn't defeat you. But this isn't just a mining station anymore. This is a human settlement, defended by people who refuse to surrender their freedom, and that makes all the difference." The command ship's hull began to buckle under the pressure of the mining arms. Through the security cameras, Bill could see escape pods launching as the crew abandoned their dying vessel. Within minutes, the space around Station Echo 7 was empty except for debris and scattered escape pods. The mighty hegemony assault fleet had been defeated by an old man, a tiny dragon, and a handful of miners who had found the courage to fight back. Bill slumped in his chair, exhaustion hitting him as the adrenaline faded. but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from a job well done. Spark landed on his shoulder and nuzzled against his neck, purring with what could only be described as pride. "Is it over?" Martinez asked, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. Bill nodded slowly. "For now. But word of this will spread. Other stations will know that humans can defend themselves, even against impossible odds, and the hegemony will think twice before attacking civilian settlements." Around the command center, his improvised team was celebrating with exhausted cheers and relieved laughter. They had done something incredible, something that would be remembered long after they were gone. But for Bill, the real victory was not the destroyed ships or the enemy retreat. It was the feeling of being useful again, of having people depend on him and proving worthy of their trust. The silent aged dragon had truly come back to life, and this time he intended to stay that way. 3 weeks after the battle, Bill Cross stood in his apartment packing the few belongings he wanted to keep. The space looked completely different now, clean and organized with actual furniture instead of just a chair and a table. Spark perched on his shoulder, watching the packing process with obvious interest. The tiny dragon had grown slightly since hatching, though it was still small enough to fit comfortably in Bill's hands. Its scales had settled into a beautiful pattern of silver and gold that seemed to shift depending on its mood. Right now they showed contentment mixed with anticipation. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. Bill opened it to find Chief Martinez, but the man looked very different from the panicked security officer who had initially rejected Bill's help. He stood straighter now with the confidence of someone who had faced real danger and survived. "Came to see you off," Martinez said simply. "Still can't believe you're leaving. Station could use someone like you permanently." Bill shook his head. "You don't need me anymore. You've got Harris running tactical systems like a professional. Thompson has turned our communications into something that could rival a military installation. And you're thinking like a commander instead of a security guard. This place can defend itself now." It was true. In the weeks following the battle, Station Echo 7 had transformed itself from a helpless mining outpost into something resembling a fortress. The mining equipment had been modified with proper targeting systems, communication arrays had been upgraded, and the civilian population had organized itself into an effective militia. More importantly, word of their victory had spread throughout human space. Other mining stations and colonial settlements had sent representatives to learn their defensive techniques. 3 major news networks had requested interviews. The story of how a forgotten war hero and a group of miners had defeated a hegemony assault fleet was becoming legend. "The Terran Command representative arrives tomorrow," Martinez said. "Admiral Peterson herself coming all the way out here just to offer you a position. You sure you want to turn down whatever they're offering?" Bill was sure, though the decision had not been easy. Admiral Peterson had sent several messages outlining an impressive array of opportunities. Training positions at the Naval Academy, consulting roles with colonial defense, even the possibility of commanding a new fleet designed specifically to protect outer settlements. All of it was tempting, and all of it felt like stepping backward into a life he had already lived. 20 years ago, I would have jumped at any of those offers, Bill told Martinez. But I'm not the same person I was then. The war taught me how to destroy things, how to win battles and defeat enemies. What I want to do now is teach people how to protect what they love. Spark chirped approvingly and flew to land on the small bag Bill had packed. Inside were his old military manuals, personal journals from his service days, and several new notebooks filled with tactical ideas he had developed since the battle. It was not much to show for a lifetime, but it represented something valuable. Martinez nodded slowly. The academy position they offered, training new officers, that's about protection too, isn't it? In a way, Bill agreed. But those cadets will learn to think like soldiers, to see the universe as a series of tactical problems to be solved with superior firepower. I want to teach something different. What Bill wanted to teach was harder to explain because it involved concepts that did not fit neatly into military doctrine. He wanted to show people that the greatest human strength was not their weapons or their ships, but their willingness to sacrifice for each other. The miners of Station Echo 7 had proven that when they chose to fight instead of surrender, not because they were soldiers, but because they were human. A second chime announced another visitor. This time it was Harris, looking younger than his 25 years, but carrying himself with new confidence. Behind him were Thompson and a dozen other station residents who had participated in the defense. "Heard you were leaving today," Harris said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide his disappointment. "Wanted to thank you again for everything you taught us." "I didn't teach you anything you didn't already know," Bill replied honestly. "I just helped you remember that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to." Thompson stepped forward, holding a small device that Bill recognized as a modified communication unit. "We made this for you," she said shyly. "It's programmed with the tactical frequencies we developed during the battle, plus some new ones we've been working on, in case you ever need to contact us, or if other stations need help setting up their own defenses." Bill accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. It represented hours of work and careful thought, but more than that, it represented their faith in him and their belief that he would continue to make a difference wherever he went. Spark flew from Bill's shoulder to land on the communication device. Examining it with obvious interest, the dragon's scales shifted to warm gold, and it chirped once in what sounded like approval. "Where will you go?" Martinez asked. Bill had given this question a lot of thought over the past few weeks. Admiral Peterson's offer had included access to personnel files for outer settlements, places where experienced leadership was desperately needed. There were dozens of mining stations, agricultural colonies, and research outposts scattered across human space, all of them vulnerable to the same kind of attack that Echo 7 had faced. "Wherever people need help learning to protect themselves," Bill said simply. "There are a lot of settlements out there that think they're helpless just because they're not military installations. I want to prove them wrong. It would not be glamorous work. There would be no medals or news interviews, no parades or recognition from high command. Just small groups of ordinary people learning that they were stronger than they thought, that humanity's greatest weapon was its refusal to give up hope." The transport ship that would carry Bill to his next destination was scheduled to arrive within the hour. He finished packing while his visitors shared stories about the changes that had taken place on the station since the battle. Property values were rising as people realized that Echo 7 was now one of the safest places in the outer systems. New businesses were opening and several families had decided to have children despite the uncertain times. "You know what the best part is?" Harris said with a grin. "The hegemony has stopped raiding settlements in this entire sector. Word got out about what happened here, and now they're not sure which places can actually defend themselves. Just the possibility that there might be another Commander Cross waiting for them is enough to make them think twice." Bill felt a warm glow of satisfaction at that news. The real victory was not the ships they had destroyed, but the attacks they had prevented. Somewhere out there, families were safe, because the hegemony was afraid to take chances with human settlements. When the transport ship docked, Bill said his goodbyes quickly. He had never been good at emotional farewells, and these people had work to do. They had built something special on Station Echo 7, and he did not want to distract them from the task of maintaining it. Spark rode on his shoulder as they boarded the transport, its scales bright with anticipation for their next adventure. The ship's captain, a middle-aged woman named Roberts, greeted them with obvious respect. "Heard about what you did at Echo 7, she said as they settled into their quarters. "Half the outer settlements are talking about it. Makes people feel like maybe the galaxy isn't such a dangerous place after all." Through the viewport, Bill watched Station Echo 7 shrink into the distance. The mining operation continued its work, the massive equipment moving with precise efficiency under the control of people who now understood their own strength. It looked peaceful and prosperous, like a place where families could build good lives without fear. "Where to first?" Captain Roberts asked, studying the navigation charts. Bill pulled out Thompson's communication device and activated the scanning function. Across human space, dozens of settlements appeared on the display, most of them small and isolated, all of them potentially vulnerable to the kind of attack Echo 7 had faced. "There," Bill said, pointing to a small agricultural colony near the edge of the sector. "They sent a distress call 3 days ago reporting strange ships in their system. By the time any official response arrives, it might be too late." Spark chirped eagerly and spread its tiny wings, as if ready to fly there immediately. The dragon's enthusiasm was infectious, reminding Bill of why he had chosen this path. 20 years ago, he had been the dragon of the Terran fleet, breathing fire on humanity's enemies and protecting the species through superior firepower and tactical brilliance. It had been a necessary role during wartime, but the war was over now. Today he was something different, Still a dragon, but one who protected by teaching others to protect themselves. Instead of breathing fire to destroy enemies, he lit flames of courage in ordinary people who discovered they were capable of extraordinary things. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, Bill settled back in his chair with Spark curled contentedly on his chest. Ahead of them lay new challenges, new people to help, and new opportunities to prove that humanity's greatest strength was not its ability to wage war, but its refusal to surrender hope. The silent, aged dragon was truly alive again, and his fire burned brighter than ever before. But now it was a flame that created rather than destroyed, a light that showed others they had the power to defend what they loved. In the vast darkness of space, that light would continue to spread from settlement to settlement, carried by ordinary people who had learned they were anything but ordinary. And somewhere in that light, the future of human space was being written one act of courage at a time.